Okay, hello everybody. This is week 12 lecture summary for bu1003 and bu1903. And this week we will cover two topics. First, we will look at physical policy. We actually more or less touched physical policy previously, but today we will look at it in more details. Secondly, we will investigate the relationship between unemployment and inflation, which we call Phillips curve. Okay. What is physical policy? It refers to the government's choice regarding the overall level of purchase or tax. So basically, it's about G and T, the government's decision on spending, whether the government want to increase, decrease, or keep unchanged the spending, and the tax, whether the government want to increase, decrease, or keep unchanged tax rate. So we know that aggregate demand is composed of C, consumption, plus I, investments, plus G, government spending, plus net export. So if suppose the decision is to increase spending by $1, so now, first, immediately we have aggregate demand increased by $1 because there's a G here. So increasing and spending or decreased spending will affect the aggregate demand immediately. Later on, we have what we call multiplier effect. Basically, it says that if we increase spending by $1, the government increase spending by $1, in the end, aggregate demand will increase by more than $1. Okay, how? Let's look at this. Okay, suppose the government spends $100 with a local construction company, and the government spends $100 with a local construction company. The construction company earns an extra $100. So at this point, the aggregate demand in the economy increased by $100. Then this company has to give some of that money to the government in tax. So that's $20. And this company saves sums of that money, which is $10. And then the company spends $30 importing supplies from Chile. Then the company buys $40 worth of timber from local hardware stores. So local hardware stores earns an extra $40. So at this point, the aggregate demand increase in the local economy by $140. This process continue forever. So we see that. The government pumps in $100 into the local economy, and the aggregate demand in the local economy increased by more than $100. And you might be wondering, how much dollar will the aggregate demand eventually be? Okay, let's suppose let's suppose R is what we call propensity of consumption. Namely, the percentage of the income that is spent and the that is consumed. Say $1 for in $1 income. With $1 income, consumers spend R dollar. R, for example, is 0.5 in consumption. So we call this propensity of consumption. So let's suppose I is equal to 0.5. Then given the initial government spending of $100, so eventually aggregate demand increased by $100 divided by 0.5. This is similar to the money multiplier that we see in the money creation process. So it's $200. So the aggregate demand increased by $200. Okay, so this is multiplier effect. However, there's another contrasting effect as well. We call it a crowding out effect. Basically, so now we have price is 80. So the increase in the government spending shift this aggregate demand curve, say by $100. Shift to the right by $200. So the government pumps in $100. The aggregate demand increased by $200 due to the multiplier effect. So we observe that price goes up, output goes up. So price goes up, we find that money demand goes up. So in the money market, so we have a diagram like this. Interest rate, money. So this is money supply. This is money demand. So now money demand goes up because price goes up. Consumers need people need to hold more money to handle the day-to-day transactions. So we clearly see that interest rate goes up. So in the money market, I goes up. This implies that investment cost goes up. So the second component of the aggregate demand decrease. So this is a crowding out effect. Due to this crowding out effect, the shift of aggregate demand to the right by $200 will be actually less than $200, will be something like this. So the aggregate demand will shift to the left by a little bit. And usually we see that the net impact will be to shift the aggregate demand to the left, to the right, increase the aggregate demand. All right, so that's physical policy regarding spending, increase or decrease spending. G, the government can equivalently say we want to cut tax or increase the tax. So using tax. It should be noted that in the aggregate demand component, there's no tax So tax will affect aggregate demand indirectly, say through consumption if it is an income tax, or through investment if it is a company tax. So, and there's also associate and multiply effect and crowding out effect as well. Alright, tax can be sometimes fiscal policy can be used as automatic stabilizer. Which means that if the economy gets into recessions, then this fiscal policy will automatically push the economy upward. If the economy overheated, then this fiscal policy, for example, like tax, will cools down the economies. Will cool down automatically cools down the economies. For example, let's look at this economy. Aggregate demand, so long aggregate supply. Initially, economy at point A. So now, for some reason, suppose there's an adverse aggregate demand shock. So let's shift the aggregate demand curve to the left. So which means price goes down, output goes down. Okay, so now given this, so due to adverse demand shock, which could be say from external, so there's a reduce in the exports. Economy move A to B, i.e. price drop, output drops, or unemployment goes up. Given this, so now so income goes down, output goes down means income goes down. So tax will goes down. So let's shift this aggregate demand curve to the right by a little bit, such that it pushes the economy back a little bit. So the impact of this adverse demand side shock will not be as big as it used to be. So the tax automatically drops. So let's shift aggregate demand curve to the right, cushioning the negative impact, the adverse impact of the demand side shock. Alright, so that's physical policy. The second topic we want to cover is we want to look at what we call Phillips curve, which is a relationship between unemployment rate and inflation rate. So essentially, we want to look at the economy from another angle, from the perspective of unemployment and inflation. Alright, so now let me derive this, let me call it short run Phillips curve. graphically. So let's look at SAD first. So now vertical axis is output, horizontal axis. Usually we have price on the vertical axis. The horizontal axis is Y output. Vertical axis is price. So for the illustration purpose, I'm going to change this, the vertical axis, to inflation. With inflation, it's just the percentage change of the price. They are related. And we have long run, aggregate supply curve, aggregate demand curve, short run, aggregate supply curve. The economy is at point A. So inflation rate is PO. So it's at output is at its natural rate of output. Unemployment is at its natural rate of unemployment. Okay. So since economy is at point A at its long-run equilibrium, here the expectation, people expected inflation will be the same as the actual inflation. People get the expectation right. Okay, let's turn to the inflation unemployment angles. So corresponding to point A, if we look at the inflation unemployment angles, we know the corresponding is U bar. So that's point A here. Now, let me say, for some reason, aggregate demand shift to the right. For example, it could be due to the government increased spending. Could be due to the central bank cut down the interest rate. So economy move from point A to point B. So output increases, inflation rate increases. So economy move from point A to point B. So at B expectation, people haven't changed the expectation yet. Okay, so people get the expectation. People keep the expectation at the previous level. So now we observe that inflation rate goes up from pi O to pi 1. And output goes up, Y goes up, which means they need to hire more workers. Okay, let me write down here. Okay. Then due to demand shock, for example, G increase, AD curve shift right. This implies economic move from point A to point B, i.e. inflation rate goes up, output goes up, which is the same as saying unemployment goes down. So now unemployment goes down. So that's U1. That's point B. So link these points together. We get the short run flips curve, which corresponds to the initial level of which correspond to where people have the same expectation. People haven't changed the expectation yet. Okay, so let's show on our Phillips curve. All right. In the long run, we see that people observe that inflation goes up, so they adjust upward the expectation. They're going to say that, okay, see in the past few years inflation is high, so I'm going to revise upward my expectation. So given that they have high expected price or expected inflation, they're going to ask for higher wages. Wage rate goes up. So wage rate goes up means profit margin for firms goes down. So firms respond by cut down the aggregate supply decrease or shift to the left, such that the economy go back to its long run equilibrium. So in terms of diagram, so this Shalom aggregate supply curve should shift to this position, so the economy move from point B to point C. So output goes back, inflation rate keep going up. So at pi 2. So now at pi 2, people get the expectation correct again. So expected inflation rate is equal to the actual inflation rate. So now for point C's inflation rate is at pi 2. Unemployment rate go back to its natural level. It's pi 2. So let's point C. Link C and A. We get a long run Phillips curve. So this Phillips curve describes the relationship between unemployment and inflation. And in the short run, we see that they possibly exist a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. If the government wants to combat the unemployment rate, say using expansionary fiscal policy by increasing spending or cut down the tax, then it is necessary that they will have a high inflation rate in the short run. However, in the long run, we see that due to the fact that the money is neutral, output is at its natural level output, unemployment rate is at its natural rate of unemployment. The long run Phillips curve is vertical at the natural rate of unemployment, which means that no matter what inflation rate is, the unemployment rate will be the same at its natural rate. Okay, we can see that expected inflation, people's expectation plays a very important role. Important roles, particularly for the economy to move from short run to long run. Okay. So let's look at Phillips curve, inflation, unemployment rate. So let's the short run Phillips curve corresponding to the initial to a level of expected inflation, as in our previous diagram. Let's see what happened if people increase the expectation. What's going to happen to the short-long Phillips curve? So if people increase the expectation, we know that short-long aggregate supply curve shift to the left. Oops. See here, short-long aggregate supply curve shift to the left, and which results in unemployment rate to increase, such that economic output decreases, unemployment rate to increases, and inflation rate to increases. So we see that at every inflation level, unemployment rate goes up. Unemployment rate goes up because output goes down. Short-long aggregate supply curve shift to left. So, for example, previously, say at pi o, previously the unemployment rate is u0. So now, because of the aggregate supply curve shift to the left, rather than this level of unemployment rate, now the unemployment rate is this level, this point. Similarly, if inflation rate is at this level, previously unemployment rate is this many, now it's this many. Okay, so shift. So the whole short-long Phillips curve shift to the left. So short-long Phillips curve shift right. So now this is short-long Phillips curve. So that corresponds to a high level of expectation. All right. So let's Phillips curve. Let's describe the relationship between unemployment rate, and inflation rate. Let's look at data. So here is the Phillips curve of the United States. In the 60s, is quite downward sloping. However, if the 1970 data is added, the kind of Phillips curve breaks down. And similarly for Australia, a kind of downward sloping pattern is observed. And given that when the 1970 data were added in, this relationship break down. What happened? This is because of supply side shock, adverse changes adverse shocks to the aggregate supply. Particularly the petroleum price increase. That increase firms' cost of production. So now, say due to the petroleum price increases, this short-long aggregate supply curve shift to the left. That shift this whole Phillips curve to the right. So giving the policymakers a less favorable trade-off between unemployment and inflation. That's what happened. All right. So we see that expectation plays important roles. So researchers usually model this expectation by what we call rational expectation. There are other types of expectation. For example, adaptive expectation, perfect foresight, rational expectation is one of them. Phillips curve suggests that expected inflation explains why there's a trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the short run, but not in the long run. So this brings us to the theory of rational expectations. That suggests people optimally use all of the information they have, including including information about government policy when forecasting the futures. So the theory of rational expectations suggests that when economic policies change, people adjust their expectation of inflation accordingly. And what we have been doing is implicitly assume rational expectation. All right, that's all for this week. And thank you for your attention.